This video contains spoilers for the books and the games, which will also mean it will include spoilers for the Witcher Netflix show once it gets into its further seasons. Tisaya de Vries had been Rectoress of Aretuza for a long time, and someone had to eventually replace her by taking this role over from her. This person is Margarita Laux-Antille. Margarita came from a family that had produced mages in the past. Her grandmother was also a mage, who at the time worked for Tisaya de Vries as her personal assistant. However, after she got an incident with Prince Amavet of Temeria, who was one of the Hotborg triplets, she was put on house arrest at Aretuza for some time. Even though the actions of her grandmother may seem like it would greatly damage her reputation, Ilona Laux-Antille, at some point in her life, managed to redeem herself, as her portrait hung on the wall with those of the most famous students of the school. Two other members that the portraits hanging there were Jeda Glevesik, a family member of Sabrina Glevesik, and Tisaya de Vries, who was the only living person with their portrait on the wall. But Margarita wasn't just a sorceress who was a family member of a famous sorceress. She herself was very powerful and beautiful. In Time of Contempt, Siri described Margarita's body as that marble statues of goddesses and nymphs would blush if they saw her without clothes on. Margarita Laux-Antille was said to be the most beautiful of all the human sorceresses on the continent. But, as I said before, she was also very powerful. She could very well be one of the most powerful sorceresses to roam the continent. Even though Margarita isn't using her magic all the time in the books, there is one moment in Baptism of Fire where we get a slight hint at her capabilities. The spell of teleprojection was tricky. The sorceresses were to speak with one voice, by joining hands and thoughts. Even then, it turned out to be devilishly strenuous exercise, partly because the distance was so considerable. The clenched eyelids of Philippa Eilhart quivered, Triss Marigold panted, and the sweat beads ran down the high forehead of Kira Metz. Only the face of Margarita Laux-Antille expressed no fatigue. This might be an indication that she was stronger than them, because she's the only one that doesn't get tired by the spell. It also could have other reasons, but this could very well be a hint that she's more powerful than Philippa Eilhart, who is considered one of the most powerful female mages. Her being powerful is also a reasonable explanation why she eventually became the Rectoress of Aretuza. Margarita took her role as the Rectoress very serious. She didn't care about politics and made it clear that Aretuza was a politics-free zone. She didn't care for the kings. She cared for her students, as the school was everything to her. About her past before the books, we don't know much, except for that she, at some point, had a relationship with a man named Lars for 4 years. During this time, Lars was said to be married to another woman. However, eventually Margarita's fascination with their love ended, and she found it not worth her time, and she broke up with him. Margarita might seem a bit stern as the Rectoress of Aretuza, but in the company of her friends, she could seem like a completely different person. Before the gathering of the mages at Thanet, Margarita was staying with Tisaya de Vries in the most expensive inn in Gorstvellen, the Silver Heron. Their apartment had its own private bathhouse in the cellars, where after Tisaya and Margarita had met Ciri and Yennefer, they all went there to bathe and undress. Yennefer and Margarita seemed like they were friends, and they gossiped and, well, let me just read this bit from Time of Contempt. "My humble apologies, noble ladies," got the innkeeper suddenly, unseen from above. "Please forgive my daring to disturb, but an officer wishes to speak to Madame de Vries urgently. Apparently the matter will brook no delay." Margarita Laux-Antille giggled and winked at Yennefer. Upon which they pulled the towels from their hips and assumed exotic and extremely provocative poses. "Let the officer in," shouted Margarita, trying not to laugh. "Welcome, we're ready." "Children," sighed the sorceress, shaking her head. "Cover yourself, Ciri." The officer came in, but the enchantress's prank misfired. The officer wasn't embarrassed at the sight of them, and didn't blush, gape or goggle, because the officer was a woman. This woman was Rayla, who throughout the books appears here and there in her fight and battle against the Scoia'tael. I could go on about other things that they talked about in the bathhouse, however I prefer not to read the entire chapter from the book for the video. So let's just keep going. I can, however, try and draw some conclusions from their discussions. It seemed like Yennefer and Margarita were good friends. They were both liked and respected by Tissaia de Vries. And it seemed like they were both about the same age, with Margarita possibly being just a bit older than Yennefer. Yennefer even trusted Margarita with Ciri, as she put Ciri in her care. Margarita knew how important Ciri was, and when Dijkstra tried to take Ciri from Margarita, she refused him. He couldn't push further, as he knew that there were hundreds of ladies from the best Redanian families that studied there, which Margarita could hold against leverage against him. Yennefer, during the events of the Tennant coup, took Ciri back from Margarita. As Tissaia, Yennefer wanted Ciri to speak prophecies and visions to some of the rebelling mages led by Philippa Eilhart, to try and stop them. This of course didn't go as planned. The Isle of Thanet saw a lot of destruction and death that day. Margarita herself didn't get involved, as her priorities were of the safety of her students. Once everything had passed, she continued running Aretuza. But this school for female mages wasn't the only thing she was a part of, as she became one of the members of the Lodge of Sorceresses. She wasn't interested in the politics, kings, kingdoms and wars. She only cared about the education of her students, and the future of magic. When Ciri eventually made an appearance in front of the lodge, only Margarita Laux-Antille and Triss Merigold gave her smiles and pleasant looks, as they knew each other and had met before. When during this meeting the moment came, where they voted whether to let Ciri go to Geralt or not, she said the following. "I also vote for her," Margarita said with a smile. "You may wonder at my motivations, ladies, but I do it for Tissaia de Vries. If Tissaia was among us, she would not agree that in order to maintain the unity of the Lodge, it's necessary to use coercive methods or restrictions of personal freedom." Margarita had a deep respect for Tissaia, and whenever she acted, it seemed like she thought about what Tissaia would do. The books don't talk much about the future, but we do get one bit of information. At some point in the future, at least more than 100 years after the books most likely, the likeliness of most of the members of the Lodge of Sorceresses has been lost. Only 2 members still had their precise and real likeness known. Seal de Tankerville, whose painting can be found in the palace of Len Exeter, and Margarita Laux-Antille. Her painting had miraculously survived a fire in Thanet that happened between the books and 1373, most likely. At this point, I'll bring an end to the book portion of this video and move on to the games. Due to the Lodge's scheming in The Witcher 2 and the death of 2 northern kings, their operations eventually came to light, and the witch hunters started hunting down mages on King Radovid's orders. Margarita knew that it was only a matter of time before the witch hunters would arrive at Aretuza, and therefore she fled with the novices to Novigrad, after she had heard that Triss was helping mages escape to Kovir. You might wonder why they didn't just teleport to Kovir. There were still novices, they probably weren't able to create portals, and I guess it was a little bit too much for Margarita to keep teleporting in between Kovir and Aretuza, as of course that required a lot of energy. And it's not sure how many novices there were in the first place. Once Margarita arrived in Novigrad, she received a short note, stating that Verdanians had invaded Aretuza and burned down the libraries. A group of novices had fled with another sorceress. Their fate is unknown. However, unfortunately for Margarita, right after she arrived in Novigrad, she and her novices were captured and taken to the Dairat prison in Oxenford. Here, Radovid decided he wanted to torture her, but not by inflicting pain upon herself. He had her watch, as one by one, all her beloved students and novices were burned at the stake. He wanted her to burn last. She would suffer by seeing all those who she cared about die in front of her. Fortunately for her, she was freed by Geralt and Yennefer, just before she could be executed. She rejoined her fellow lodge members and helped Geralt and Yennefer in their fight against the Wild Hunt on the shores of Skellig. Margarita is one of the most influential and potentially even among the most powerful sorceresses in the north. However, she cares little for politics, and instead she always tried to do what was best for her students, which is perhaps one of her attributes that makes her stand out. That was it for Margarita Laux-Antille, the Rectoress of Aretuza. What do you think about her? And what character would you like to see next? Till the next video. Bye.